They fry them. Yeah. No, you don't have to shecht it. A grasshopper is like a fish. Like a fish.
You throw it into oil.
Mind you, the Gemara does say that if you eat a grasshopper before it's dead, the Gemara says there's a problem with Bal Tashatsu. It's considered very repulsive to eat the grasshopper before the grasshopper is dead. Basically, Rabbi Hershel Schachter takes the grasshopper, he makes a shahakol, he drops it on the floor in the middle of the bracha. He steps on it too. His Talmud is sitting there with a jar of grasshoppers, and he takes another one out. Rabbi Hershel Schachter says, motions, he's looking on the floor to find the grasshopper that he dropped, and he ate the grasshopper. So first of all, there's a Ma'aser Rav there, because if anybody took notice, in Siman Reish Vav, during Hilchos Brachas, those of you in the Smichas Chava program, the Beis Yosef brings a Yerushalmi in the 6th parak of Brachas, that if somebody takes a turmus is a type of bean, not exactly what it is, and you make a bracha on the turmus, Yerushalmi wants to know, if you drop the turmus and then the turmus gets dirty, you can't eat this bean anymore, do you need to make another bracha? So the Yerushalmi wanted to bring a proof from a stream of water. People all the time go to a stream of water and they make a bracha of shahakol, and by the time they're finished the bracha, it's already, the water that was existent when they made the bracha is already at the other side of the stream, and they're making a bracha on water that wasn't around, it wasn't in front of them when they made the bracha. So the Yerushalmi says you can't compare. The Yerushalmi says when you make a bracha on a stream of water, you know that the water is going to flow down the stream, it's going to flow down, and you know that when you make a bracha, that you're not going to have the water in front of you that was there when you made the bracha. But here, we didn't expect to drop the turmus, you didn't expect to lose the bean. And that's the end of the Yerushalmi. Now, there's a machlokes rishonim if the question of the Yerushalmi was resolved or not. The Rambam rules that the Gemara holds that since dropping a fruit or a bean and getting it ruined is not the same as a stream, so you need to make another bracha. So according to the Rambam, if Rav Hershel Schachter would have taken another turmus, he would have had to make another bracha. The problem is that the Rabbi and Rabbeinu Tam, they don't rule that way. They learn that since the Yerushalmi couldn't bring a conclusive proof one way or the other, so the original question of the Yerushalmi about somebody dropping a turmus and it getting ruined, the Gemara doesn't have a conclusion whether or not you need to make a bracha on the turmus or not. So Safek brachas lahakel. According to the Rabbi and the Rabbeinu Tam, you don't make a bracha. So he found the locust on the floor. Right. No, because if he would have not found the locust on the floor, it would have been a machlokes rishonim whether he would have to make another bracha. And he didn't want to get into the seven brachas l'hakol, so the Talmud said, "Here, take another one," and he didn't want to. He was looking on the floor to find this grasshopper. Yeah.
The question is really, whenever you make a bracha, for example, if I have potato chips and I make a bracha to eat the potato chips,
right?
So do I have in mind a specific potato chip or a turmus? Do I have in mind?
Right. So the truth is,
I'm making it on. I want to eat this particular class of food, which requires this particular bracha.
Right.
Word for Adama for the potato chips, whatever else.
But a locust has chashivas as an individual.
Yeah, but the question is, all the locusts were in front of him. Yeah, the locusts were all present. It was in little jars, so he may have wanted to take another locust. It might have been tasty. He might have wanted to take another one.
No, but that's like finding a half a buck.
If you made a bracha, you made a bracha on a peanut. From a bag of peanuts, you have to make another bracha.
So, according to some Rishonim, the other peanuts only get covered by the bracha via the first peanut. So if you eat the first one, that's what the Rashba calls der grora. So the Rashba talks about this. A Rashba in Ketzim Rachim. It's a very lumdish Rashba that everybody talks about if you learn this section of halacha. It's called discharging the obligation of bracha der grora. So according to the Rambam and other Rishonim, that's the way I understood the sugya, that if you make a bracha on one peanut, so then all the other peanuts in front of you get covered. They're gror of the first peanut. That's why if you drop the first peanut and you can't find it, you need to make another bracha. According to Rabbeinu Tam and the Ravid, according to Rabbeinu Tam and the Ravid, it could be that when you make a bracha on the first peanut, it directly covers all the peanuts in front of you.
Most people don't sit down to one.
They usually eat few. You can't just eat one, so then you have
have
kavanah.
mind to eat
Right.
a quantity.
Yeah.
If you're eating a quantity, it would seem to me whether you eat the first one or the second one, there's a little bit.
Yeah, so definitely intending to eat all the peanuts. The question is, do the other peanuts that you intend to eat get covered via the first peanut? And if you lose the first peanut, you make another bracha or not?
So
That's
kavanah is not.
yeah, your kavanah is to eat all the peanuts.
According to Sipurim Yerushalmi that I
Right.
heard in my family, that when they were children, I don't know if this was in Europe also or the Jerusalem, that in order to have mea brachas on Shabbos, they would eat papitas, they called garim, and on every garim they would make a bracha.
No, it's not okay.
It's not.
Not okay. Let me just repeat your question.
I'm wondering if there's any basis for it or just.
Right, so I just want to repeat your question for those of us that are on Zoom.
Housing on Shabbos, they make a bracha on the smell. That's how they get the 100 brachas.
But remind me your first name.
Yoni.
Yoni. So Yoni just said that the Superim Yerushalmi, they wanted to get the 100 brachas on Shabbos, which is more difficult to get to the 100 brachas on Shabbos because your Shemona Esrei only has 7 brachas instead of having 19 brachas. So they used to make garim, and they used to make a bracha on every garim. You're not allowed to do that. It's a bracha shenetzricha.
That's what I.
Yeah, not allowed. So that's mamish derech agav. So which gets us to today's topic. The first 3 Marokkanis are just to review. Natan is with us, but Natan is fine. We'll get you right into the sugi. Now we're talking about a controversy in 2017 where they brought a new breed of chicken from Belgium. So a lot of objectors from Rosh Hashanah wanted to say that you need to have a Masari, you need to have a tradition for every bird in order to eat it. And we don't have a tradition on this breed of chicken. So it's not a new controversy because 150 years ago, 200 years ago, we had the same achlokah between the Shalom Meishav and Rav Shlomo Kluger, the same exact story. They brought a new breed of chicken. Rav Shlomo Kluger said he was the Rav of Brod. He said it's not kosher, you can't eat it. And Rav Shlomo Meishav said, well, why are you eating turkey? So the question is, why are we talking eating turkey? Ironically, I've been told Rav Shechter doesn't eat turkey. He eats grasshoppers and he doesn't eat turkey. We'll get to the end of the shiur. Hopefully we'll explain why he does that. Okay, I happen to be a great admirer of Herschel Schachter. I have a lot of admiration for him because his knowledge of Torah is outstanding, and he's also a mensch, and he's a very, very, very wonderful person. So the first Marmokum in the sheet is the Gemara we saw last time, just to read to get ourselves oriented again. The first Marmokum, number 1 in the Marmokum, She'amar Yitzhak Oich Tahar Nechel B'Mesaret, and of a bird, if you want to eat a specific bird, if you have a Mesaret, if you have a tradition that this is one of the kosher birds, you can eat that bird. Okay? So the Gemara then asks, what type of tradition do you need? Do you need a tradition from rabbis, from a Rav, from a Torah teacher, or do you need a tradition from a tzayat, from a hunter? The Gemara's maskana is, rabbis, what do they know about chickens? Right? You need somebody who knows the identity of the different birds. So the Gemara's maskana is that you need a masara from a tzayat, not from a chacham. Okay? It's interesting, it reminds me that there's a popular notion that is taken that's taken root, especially in the Olam HaYeshivot and in the world of the yeshivas, that if you learn Torah, you can perceive all scientific knowledge. Okay? Now, where did that come from? Where did that idea come from? It's the Ramban of the Ramban al Torah. It brings a Shiur Shim Rabbah. It says the Shlomo HaMelech, that was the wisest of all men, and the Medrash says that he understood botany perfectly from learning the Torah. Okay? So that's where they got the idea that if you learn Torah, because that's the concept hafochba v'afochba tekulaba. It's a Mishnah and Avos. Learn the Torah deeply, right? Turn over the Torah, delve into the Torah. The Kolba says the Rabbi Yoina there that since the Torah was the blueprint of creation, it comes from the Medrash Rabban Bereshit. It's a famous concept in the Zohar. Histakel baraisu bara alma. Kadosh Baruch Hu looked into the Torah, so therefore all the sciences are inherent in the Torah. But the question is, you see that already in the times of the Tanaim and the Maraim, they weren't on that level to perceive science from the Torah. And the proof is Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai needed a doctor. We all learned this Gemara on Tisha B'Av, the famous Bar Kamsa Gemara, that Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai made 3 requests from the Romans. One of the requests was to get a doctor to heal Rav Yana, who was fasting for 40 years, and the Roman doctors knew the way to heal him. Versus they basically slowly built up his digestive system so that he would be able to handle food. Chachma b'goyin tam. So they have the chachma, but the idea was that according to the Ramban, Shlomo Melech was able to perceive that chachma also through the Torah. The Torah that the goyim had, he perceived it through the Torah. So that's number one. You see another example. The Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Yud says that Rav went with the shepherds to learn about the different blemishes in animals, right? To see what kind of blemishes are permanent, which blemishes are passing. So the Gemara says, and here's another example of Sayat. They have to learn the identity of birds. Okay, I don't know if that's science, but there are obviously a lot of scientific elements in being able to identify birds. So that's something that you have to learn from a hunter. It's interesting that I mentioned this before. This is not the first time I mentioned that the Chazon Ish, I quoted a Gemara in Bechairos. The Gemara in Bechairos says that there are two pipes in the male member, one for semen, one for urine, and it doesn't match up with the verifiable anatomy that we can ascertain. So he said he went to the doctors to learn if this is something that a change that could be attributed to evolutionary to evolution, to biological evolution. This is something that I mentioned before. Okay, so number two in the reference sheet, what do you need a Masara for? So number two says the Raj ben Torah Sabayis, just the second paragraph there. What do you need a Masara for? Something for a bird that doesn't have all three anatomical features that by process of elimination tell you it's a kosher bird. Okay, so for that you need a Masara, because amongst the kosher birds, some have three anatomical features. The three anatomical features that are delineated in the Gemara, if just in Natan, the three anatomical features is a gizzard, right, a peelable gizzard, and a zepek is a crop, and also it has an etzbe yiseir, which we had some. I took a picture of an orev. An orev is not a kosher bird, but it happens to have that anatomical feature. So none of the non-kosher birds, not even one of the 24 non-kosher birds, have all three anatomical features. Some of them have one, the orev has two, but none of them have all three. So when do you need them? If you have all three anatomical features, so by process of elimination, you know that it's a kosher bird, and then you don't need a masaret. You only need the masaret, according to the Rashba, when it doesn't have all three anatomical features, because amongst the kosher birds, some of them have all three anatomical features, some don't. Okay, the only thing that you can ascertain is that if it has all three anatomical features by process of elimination, it can be a non-kosher bird.
What was the question you were going to ask the zoologist?
Yeah, Dr.
What was the question?
Kaufman, yeah.
I forgot the question.
So, because the Gemara...
Does a turkey have all three?
A turkey has all three, yeah. So basically, I was trying to think, the Gemara said that there was something that was called a Tarnagalta da Agma, or Tarnagal. One sheet to distinguish between the Tarnagal and the Tarnagalta, but Maskana of the Gemara, according to most Rishonim, is that there is the swamp Tarnagal. Okay? But she told me, Dr. Kaufman, she's actually the head of she works in the aquarium. Right? She's the head veterinarian in the aquarium. Okay? So her husband, I spoke to her husband, she says, you have to speak to my wife. My wife, she's one of the greatest experts on birds in the country. So I had a little discussion with her. So she said that this Tarnagalta da Agma, which is number 20 on the reference sheet, she's a black grouse, she said it's a pheasant. She said it doesn't belong to the chicken family. So it's not a chicken. So it was called the Tarnagalta, but it's a black grouse. It's not really part of the chicken family. I think that that's important. Because if it was part of the chicken family, that would mean that there is a bird in the chicken family that's not kosher, and then we would need a Masara for every single breed of chicken. So that's why I think it's important. But according to Rashi, right, we need the Masara. According to Rashi, has an opinion which, according to the Ramban, is very unscientific. I'll wait for a moment. It's not going to come. I think it's a Nanaf truck. You know the Nanaf trucks? Yeah, breast. Okay.
Is one not in Uman? What's wrong with it?
No, the Nanafs, they don't go to Uman. They don't go to Uman. I wish they did. At least for tonight. Baruch Hashem, nothing happened, which is, Baruch Hashem, there was no deadly incidents. Baruch Hashem, everybody's okay. So now, according to Rashi, right, Rashi has an opinion which, according to the Rabbi, is unscientific. According to Rashi, it needs to have 4 simanim. It has to have those 3 anatomical features. Plus, you have to know for certain that it's not a bird of prey, that it doesn't kill its prey. Okay? So according to Rashi, you need to have a Masar that it doesn't kill its prey. And we saw that there was this mishap, okay? And the Gemara we saw the Gemara that there was a mishap, there was this Tarnagal Dama, the swamp chicken, they assumed that it was, it's not really a chicken, this Tarnagal, the Agma, they assumed that it was kosher, and then they found that it was killing its prey. So according to Rashi, it could have had the 3 anatomical features, and they still messed it up, they still blew it. According to the Rashi, they only blew it because it didn't have all 3 anatomical features. If it did, then it wouldn't be an issue, okay? So this is review from last week. Right? Let's move on the... I think we can skip most of these references because that basically sums up number 12, number 13. We mentioned in last week's Shiur that according to the Ramah, we have to be machmir the sheet of Rashi, that's the sheet of the Rosh, number 11 in the reference sheet, that we adhere to the stringency of Rashi, that you need a Masara even for a bird that has all 3 anatomical features. So it says the Shalom Eshet, how are they eating turkeys? So the answer is because the Ikar Halacha really is like the Ramban, and he says we should really be ruling like the Ramban and the Rajv and the Ran because they are more scientifically sound. He says the empirical evidence supports the opinion of the Ran. But because of Minog, we're already choshesh for the sheet of Rashi. But since the turkey has the 3 anatomical features and people already started eating it, so therefore, la'achar ha'maisa, b'di'evet will let it pass. And that's probably why Rav Shachar doesn't want to eat the turkey, because he's choshesh that he doesn't want to rely on this kula of the Shalom Eshet. It's interesting, they thought it came from India. Somehow, information didn't come across correctly, and there was some reason that they believed that it came from India, and there were people who claimed it had a Masara, but it could not have had a Masara because it came from the Americas. Right? So therefore, obviously, according to Shalom Eshet, says that we are Sailach on the sheet of the Ramban, and the Ran that has all 3 anatomical features, you don't need a Masara. Okay? Carrying on, let's get to part number 6, which is a very, very important part of the Shiur. Again, in that little Pachkavil, I see that you have that little Pachkavil still over there. Yeah, if you want to show that Pachkavil around, what does the Pachkavil show? I didn't include it in this week's. It shows basically a depiction of a whole bunch of chickens, and they have like a chart with all sorts of arrows how the chickens are crossbred. Okay? So you see, right? If we don't know how they're crossbreeding these chickens, who knows what? Maybe there's a chazan, maybe they're crossbreeding a pig with a chicken. Okay, I don't know. They quote there a tshuva from Rav Vosner, right, on that Pachkavil. And Rav Vosner basically says that we shouldn't allow all of this crossbreeding going on because we have no hashkacha, we cannot oversee what kind of chickens are being interbred, so therefore we shouldn't allow chickens that are bred. Now the truth is, this is interesting because according to the Avnei Nezer, and we'll see now that it's based on the Tosefta and the Gemara B'chairos, if the chickens are able to be bred between each other, that in itself is the biggest proof that they're all kosher, because a kosher bird and a non-kosher bird are not able to be crossbred. Okay, so that takes us to part number 6 of the Shiur, number 22. Right, number 22 on the reference sheet. It says, "Ein behemoth tmeya yoledis min tahira, v'lo tahira yoledis min tmeya." He says, if something comes out of the womb of a kosher animal, by definition, it's kosher. The Gemara discusses a very strange phenomena of a kosher animal giving birth to something that appears like a non-kosher animal. Okay? I don't know, I've never researched it, I don't know how frequent this is of one species giving birth to an animal that looks like another species, but maybe it's only theoretical, but in any case, the Gemara says, even theoretically, if you have a kosher animal that gives birth to something that looks like a non-kosher species, it's still kosher, because a behemoth tmeya cannot be born from a kosher animal, and a tahara, a kosher animal, cannot be born from a non-kosher animal.
Scientific or it's a religious?
Probably it's giving a theological, a halachic parameter. I don't think the Gemara is dealing essentially with the science of it, right? But who knows? But as far as
typically the Gemara has this mitzias, that the Gemara could find out, and it does.
Yeah, the Gemara is able to find the mitzias. But you see, it's very interesting. You see, oftentimes somebody had a brother that sent me, can you find examples of controlled studies in the Talmud? Right? and I didn't find, it's very, very difficult to find.
It's a scientific concept.
Controlled studies, the question is, why did they not engage in controlled studies, which is in itself a question. I mean, I gave him an answer, my other brother-in-law also came up with the same word, because it happened to be in the Daf Yomi at the time. The Gemara says a fascinating thing, that if a woman is a virgin, and you put her on top of a barrel of wine, the Gemara says you'll be able to detect in her breath some scent of wine, right? So the Gemara says that they tried it once, but they didn't really do a very extensive controlled study. They tried it with maybe 2 or 3. That's it, right? So that was one example of a very limited example of the control. The truth is, in the times the early philosophers weren't into the whole business of controlled studies, right? Aristotle, that kind of thing, he didn't get into that kind of stuff.
Isn't there a halacha in the Torah not to crossbreed?
Yeah, you're not allowed to crossbreed. Yeah.
If the Torah says
Yeah.
that you can crossbreed, so why?
But the Torah says it's forbidden to crossbreed.
Right.
But if you do crossbreed, it will produce offspring. So in other words, it's something you're not allowed to do.
Which means that the Torah presumes that you can.
Yeah, the Torah presumes.
It doesn't make a difference between. Does it talk about behemoth?
So very good. So that's a very good question. You only wants to know if we talk about a behemoth, so that's very good. We'll get to that very soon. We'll hopefully cover your question this year. Okay? The Gemara says something else. A large animal can't become impregnated from a small animal. Okay? It's impossible to crossbreed a human with an animal. It's interesting. I always recall as a young child looking at an encyclopedia an example where they crossbred a bird and a cat. They produced some sort of offspring. Maybe it was false. I don't know. I don't know. Who knows? Okay, so number 2.
There were, though, I think, in history or even recently, when the shepherds would go out for weeks or months at a time to the fields, and all they had around them were sheep, that they did have some kind of
bestiality, sure.
But that doesn't mean that
doesn't mean they'll ever be born. It won't produce offspring. I had when I was doing the Mordechai Leoskal and getting my smichos, I had a friend of mine there in Kollel. He was a Nachal Haredi, and he was a sharpshooter. So he used to patrol the Arab villages. And he told me that when we were learning Avodah Zarah, the Gemara Avodah Zarah says you're not allowed to leave your animal with a Nachri. Okay? Right. Nachri, I mean, the Nachri they were probably thinking of were probably Arabs, because that was the culture. Okay, they lived in Bavel, in Babylon, which is current day Iraq, or in Eretz Yisrael. So I guess the Gentiles that they dealt with mostly were Arabs. But Ezra says, don't leave your animal with a Nachri, because he might engage in bestiality with the animal. That's not it's not one of Sheva mitzvahs. It is because it's under the guise of arayot. One of the 7 Mrs. B'nai Noach is to refrain from sexual impropriety. It's interesting. I recall I was once on a flight. Did I ever tell you this? I was on a flight to Canada, I think, and I sat next to a non-Jewish fellow, very nice person. I was schmoozing with him, and he was very supportive of Israel, and he spoke passionately about the importance of morals and ethics, and I was quite impressed. So he turned to me and he said, can you tell me, I was reading a Gemara there, and he says, can you tell me what you're learning? So I told him the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. And I remember he felt very proud. He took a deep breath. He felt very proud. He says, you know something, I keep 4. Right? So that's what he said. He didn't tell me which 3 he doesn't keep. But he was quite proud that he kept 4 out of the 7. Okay? Yeah, he's Yotze Barov.
There was a movement that may still exist.
No, yeah. So we had actually here Shmuel Gordon. Shmuel Gordon is a good friend of mine. He came to the Shiur maybe 2 or 3 times. He can't come because he's too busy. So Shmuel Gordon was a pastor, first in Nigeria, and then he moved to South Africa. He's a very fine person. So eventually, he says that he had a dream one night where I don't know, some angel came to him, or I don't know what, said, go support Israel. And he had the dream 3 times. So he said he didn't know anything about Israel, so he called up a pastor that he knew from Norway, and he says, you want to support Israel? There's a pro-Israel lobby group in Norway. Every year they get together, and they engage in pro-Israel advocacy. Okay, so he went to Norway. Eventually, he started researching the Bible, and he rejected Christianity. So he half his church, he actually had a few churches. He had churches in Texas. He told me some pastors are very, very wealthy. Private planes, mansions, yachts. You can become very wealthy. So he had already quite a few churches. So he rejected Christianity. Half his church left him, but half his church stayed on with him, and they became Noachites. He now became a ger. He's now a ger tzedek. He learns Gemara, and he's a very God-fearing person. Very nice person too. His wife became Jewish with him. His two sons and daughter also became Jewish with him. Were quite close to the family. So he was the head of an entire Noachite movement. And if you go online, you'll see that they have every year the yearly conference where Noachites from all over the world get together, and they invite Rabbanim to speak. Rabbi Yoel Schwartz, who was the Mashkiach in Dvar Yerushalayim, he was their posek. So, for example, he got a call from a girl. She says, "I'm in college. Am I allowed to sit on my roommate's bed?" Okay, because one of the Shem is been enough. You're not allowed to engage in that. And they have like a whole tshuva, like a whole shtickle Torah, what they're allowed to learn, what they're not allowed to learn. They know Chayvus Havavas, they know Mesilas Yesharim, they know all the Sifrei Musar, and they're very sincere, right? So, and they have poskim real, from poskim, and they always follow their psakim. So it's very interesting. Now, Shmuel Gordon has a whole bunch of families in his kibbutz that are now becoming Jewish. 6 became Jewish already, another 8 are becoming Jewish, so that's a little bit off on a tangent. So which takes us 23 back to our topic. Number 23 in the reference sheet. So the most important principle here is that the Gemara Becharis Daf Zayin tells us that a kosher animal cannot become pregnant, cannot bear offspring from a non-kosher animal, and vice versa. Okay? So if you continue and he says, "V'lo behemim min achaya," a domesticated animal cannot become impregnated from a non-domesticated animal, doesn't mean the same species. It means a domesticated species like cows or whatever can't become pregnant from a species that's typically not domesticated, like deers or whatever. Dogs and wolves are saying one is domestic. Okay, so dogs are not necessarily inherently domesticated.
Dogs are not kosher.
Dogs are supposed to be they came from the wolf.
Right, so dogs are chaya. Dog is a chaya. A dog, the Mishnah claims says that a dog is not a behema. A dog belongs to the non-domesticated group of animals, even though you could have a domesticated dog. That's why I emphasize that it's not whether the specific animal is domesticated, it means if the species belongs to...
Domesticated doesn't mean it's a behema.
Yeah, it's a very bad translation. It's the translation I got from the Art Scroll. They say domesticated, non-domesticated. It's a very misleading translation. It basically means that there are certain species, the Gemara says, like a dog, wolves, cats, that are all considered chaya. A behema is an animal like a sheep, a cow, what have you.
Why would Art Scrolls use this kind of because Art Scrolls know what tefillin is, and the whole idea of tefillin in between is the behema daka or zeh.
Behema gasa. Yeah.
No, which is
what type of tefillin it is. Okay, that's the least of the problems. Okay, but in any case, in this case of thing, so basically, Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that chaya is mistaberes from a behema. Okay, but that's not relevant to our discussion. The most important discussion that's relevant to our discussion, when the Gemara Becharis says that a tumeya doesn't get pregnant from a tahar and vice versa, was that referring specifically to a behema, or was it referring even to birds? Because if this rule of thumb that the Gemara gave, that kosher cannot get pregnant from non-kosher, if it applies to birds too, that would have huge relevance to our discussion. That means the very fact that you could interbreed, that you can take a broccoli chicken and you can impregnate the broccoli chicken with another bird, that would itself be the greatest proof that it's a kosher bird. Right? So that's why it's important for us to determine if this rule of thumb was said with regards to oifas, was said with regards to birds as well. Okay, first of all, number 24, that's the pshat of the Rambam. The Meish of Dover is the Netziv. He also has a long tshuva about a certain dak, right, that he was asked about. And he said, B'diavad, took a very similar approach to the approach of the Shalom Meish with regards to Turkey. He says, this dak, l'chatchila, I would have not permitted the dak because there is no Musar on this specific dak. But he says, Lamais, everybody's eating it, and according to the Ramban, the duck has all 3 anatomical features, so therefore he was matrid b'diavad. But in the discussion, the Shalom Meshiv brings this Gemara in B'charas Daf Zayin, and the Nitziv says, L'fiyah Pshat, Ein af kamina ben behema v'chai la'oif b'zeh. Since the Gemara did not specify other words, that means to say the assumption is the simplest way of understanding the Gemara is that when the Gemara said, Ein tmeo min atahar, ve'ein tahar min atmeo, it was referring even birds. That means that this rule, min hastam, applies to birds as well. The Chasim Sofer also, right, says that min hastam, this rule applies to birds as well, although he's mistapik. He doesn't have any 100% proof that the rule applies to birds as well. He says, Ula yesh lapapik, maybe you could question, right, and say that the rule of Rabbi Shlomo Levi is only with regards to the behema, avol ba'oif shapa mis'abratar. Maybe that rule was only said with regards to animals. Now, the Shut Aleph L'Chashleim, that was of Shlomo Kluger, right? Anybody remember Shlomo Kluger from the machine matzah controversy? He had a very sharp tongue. He was also a very zealous person, right? Like with the matzahs, exactly. Right? So this was no exception. When he wanted to forbid, they brought a new breed of chicken into Poland, the Galicia, so he wanted to forbid it. And he just assumes, for some reason, that when it comes to oifus, when it comes to birds, the rule of oif, of a kosher animal not being impregnated by a non-kosher animal, doesn't apply to birds. Comes the Avnei Nezer, amazing. And he says, I have a proof, I have a rock-solid proof, that this rule, that a kosher animal cannot become impregnated by a non-kosher animal and vice versa, applies even by birds, and it's through diktuk. Okay? He draws out the diktuk. Now this is interesting. People say you're not supposed to learn diktuk, right? How does diktuk help us with Allah?
By the time of the Avnei Nezer, they've already tried to be more scientific.
They've tried to be more scientific.
No, how do you... No, you have to just...
Yeah.
No, but you can't really prove a negative. The negative is that you can't crossbreed a kosher...
No, but he's right. Yoni is right. If let's say they were able to prove... Let's say you take an animal that's for sure not kosher. Let's say like a raven, okay? If they managed to get a raven impregnated from, let's say, a dove, so that would prove that the Gemara's rule doesn't apply to birds.
But the problem is that if it doesn't work, you still haven't proved it.
Exactly. If it doesn't have it, then you wouldn't be able to prove it. But at least if you would be able to impregnate a non-kosher bird, with a kosher bird you would be able to prove. But the Avnei Nezer said, through using diktuk, he's absolutely certain that this rule applies to birds as well. He says, Of is always Lashon Zachar. Of is a masculine noun. He brings an example. Kol oif tahar techelu. The pasuk says every oif tahar. It doesn't say of tahara, it says of tahar. So of, number one, rule of diktuk, of is masculine. Okay, number one. Kol oif liminehu. It doesn't say limina, it says liminehu. V'chol habehema limina. You see how the Torah changes from masculine to feminine. So, we already know that of is Lashon Zachar. So he says, it's amazing that he considers this a rock-solid proof. I look at the third paragraph. It says Tmeya, feminine, Mitahar, masculine. So he says that if you maintain, right, obviously referring to a male becoming pregnant from a female. He says if it referred only to behema, a behema could be always feminine. Whether you're referring to the female behema, or whether you are referring to the male behema, behema, the noun behema is feminine. So you should say, ein tmeya min atahira, v'toi tahira v'net tmeya. Just stick with the feminine throughout the entire business. In other words, keep feminine throughout the entire way. So why do we use masculine, feminine, masculine? Because we're referring to the min of, which is a zachar. We're referring to the male versus the female. So since we're referring to the male versus the female, the actual species, so that's why you could refer to both animals and birds. Do you follow that? I'm not sure if I made myself clear enough or not. Yeah. If you're referring to the species, you can just make it simple. Refer to the feminine throughout. So the Tana needed to use a form that could apply to birds and to animals, so therefore it referred to the male animal and the female animal. Tmem and a Torah and a tmem. Because if the rule applied only to behavior, we would use only the feminine. Okay, so this he calls a raya brura. He says to him, there's no doubt in his mind that this rule of ein tahira min atmeh min atameh v'lo tmeh min hatar applies to birds. According to the Avnei Nezer, who was a very, very important posek, there's no question at all that you can eat the broccoli, which is good enough. And I'll tell you why. Because the Shalom Reish already says you have a sfeika. We have a safek if Allah is like Rashi b'chlal. Many Rishonim, the Ramban, the Rajba, the Ram, they hold that it's enough to have 3 anatomical features. So according to those Rishonim, you don't have to worry about different species of chickens. Okay, so you're already good. He says, what's the next safek? He says, if you have any other safek, it already makes it a sfek and you can be mounted. That's what the Shalom Reish is. So since you only chayshish for Rashi, right, the Rashi is concerned that you need to have a Masorah, because according to Rashi you need 4 features. You also have the feature that you know for a fact that it's not Daris. If you have the Avnei Nezer that holds already unequivocally that it's absolutely certain that the fact that an animal could bear offspring from a kosher bird, that in itself proves that it's kosher, that's already enough to be machriya.
In other words, it didn't matter exactly how he got to it, but that's...
Yeah, that's...
Avnei Nezer said, I don't have to ask questions.
That's right. Now, this gets to your question, number 29 in the reference sheet. Okay? So, the Gemara Bava Metzia, Rav Ashi, says Rav Ashi, and Musa Bominei, Rav Nechemi Reish Kalusa. He had a question. Are you allowed to bring, this is regarding the prohibition of kalayim, that you're not allowed to interbreed species. So, are you allowed to bring 2 species into the barn, into the same room, and cause them to interbreed? That's the question that they wanted to know. The question was that you bring in, let's say, horses and donkeys. So you have male horses and female horses, but you also have female donkeys. So one side is maybe it's mutter, because the male horse will prefer to interbreed with a female horse. It's only if he's stuck in the room with a donkey, he says, nish kein breid, I don't have another choice. Donkey is better than nothing. He's only going to breed with the donkey if he doesn't have his own min, if he doesn't have his own species. But if he has his own species, right, he'll go after the so pashta de lav liisura de leichase mishum tzusa de avid. The maskana is that it's okay. But in any case, the Meishav David, the Netziv, already points out, the maskana of the Gemara is that a horse, if it has a female horse, it won't breed with a donkey. If a male has its own species in the barn, it's not going to interbreed with even a species that it could theoretically breed with, but it's not going to choose a species that it's not a different species if it could choose its own species. So the Shalom Meshav said it's the same thing. He says if these birds, right, if let's say you brought all the chickens into the barn, okay, you brought all these different breeds of chicken. So if the chicken would spontaneously breed with any species of chicken, right, that proves that from the halachic standpoint, it's all one species. Because if it was a different species, let's say you brought a broccoli chicken in together with a Cornish hen chicken, whatever, and these species are interbreeding, even though it has its own breed there, right? But it's happy to breed with any of the breeds of chicken. That proves that it's all one species. Okay, so it's a little bit different than the previous proof. Here the proof is that the fact that it's spontaneously breeding with every single breed of chicken, every single variation of the chicken, that itself proves that it's one breed. Okay, so that's another proof that all these different, the broccoli, all these different types of chicken, if you bring them into the barn together, they'll all interbreed with each other, so that's another proof that it's all one chicken. Okay? This is part number 7. That's the Siman Mubeitzim, which we talked about the other week. We said that if you have an egg that's completely spherical, which means to say that a kosher egg is more pointed at one end and wider. Take any chicken egg at home, you'll see that one end is more pointed, the other end is more rounded. That's a proof that it's a kosher chicken. The second proof also is if the egg white is on the outside and the egg yolk is in the inside, that's another proof. If it has these two features, it's an indication that it's a kosher egg. But if you have an egg that's completely spherical, or it's pointed, it's equally pointed at both ends, or you have the egg white on the outside, you have the egg yolk on the outside, and you have the egg white on the inside, that's a proof that the egg is not kosher. Okay? Although the Gemara says that there is one non-kosher bird that produces eggs that look kosher. There is one species of non-kosher bird that produces eggs that have all the telltale signs of a kosher egg, so therefore you have to be choshesh. But the other way around, if you see it's completely round, right, or if one end is pointed and the other end is more rounded, then you know, if it's completely round, then you for sure know that it's not kosher. Or if the egg white is on the outside, you know for sure that it's not kosher. It's interesting that I mentioned the other week that there was a big machloket between the Tzemach Tzedek Akadmoin had the wild goose, and they were eating the eggs of the wild goose. He says they came from Chelm. He says I had an Amaretz that came from Chelm, and said in Chelm there's a wild goose that produces a completely spherical egg. Now, he didn't know that was the sign of a non-kosher bird. So he says you see that even amongst the species of goose, you have one species of goose that's kosher, and you have another species of goose that's not kosher. And he says even though the geese in Nicholsburg, right, that's where the Tzemach Tzedek made his big fuss, even though in Nicholsburg, even the wild geese were producing kosher-looking eggs, but since there is a species of goose that produces a non-kosher, an egg that has the clear indication of being not kosher, so you see, you can't just assume that every single species of goose is kosher. Okay? That was the argument of the Tzemach Tzedek. Comes to Vienna and Eibschitz. He wrote an entire kuntris called Pnei Nesher to completely disagree. He says all species of goose are the same. He says, this guy told me, this guy from Chelm, he's from Chelm, he was an Amoritz, I don't believe what he said, he probably didn't know what he was talking about. I don't have to believe everything that I don't have to believe everything that every Chelmer tells me. It's funny that it became a comical, they say Chelm, they were big Talmidei Chachamim, and for some reason the Chelm got this reputation of being silly people. I don't think it was because of this guy who didn't know how to identify an egg properly, right? I don't know if that was the reason, but that was the thing. And the other reason he says, you see, that's right. So he says, and in the end, he says, since it's interesting, the Chasam Sofer was already bothered. He says, we have all these anatomical features to help us identify a kosher bird and a non-kosher bird. He says, why didn't they use the eggs as one of the? They should have given us that indication. So Rabbi Eibschitz says, you see that it's not such a compelling siman. It's not such a good compelling siman. He says, therefore, I'm not so impressed by that. But the crazier place, Rabbi Eibschitz was already adamant that all species of geese are one and the same. Okay? Possibly, I'm saying this with a lot of conjecture. Huh? No, I didn't discuss the geese with Professor Kaufman. I should, actually. But it's interesting that I wonder if in 2017, if Rabbi Eibschitz would have said you can eat the broccoli chicken, and the Tzemach Tzedek said you can't. But the truth is, again, we have much more reasons to permit the broccoli chicken because they interbreed with other chickens, right? It has the simonim. The truth is, the geese. Yeah, I mean, there was another siman that the Balamar had for geese. He said if it has, you ever seen Donald Duck? It reminds me of Donald Duck, the cartoons that I used to watch. You have this wide, their beak is very wide. So according to the Bal Hama'ar, that itself is a proof that it's a kosher bird. That was another Masar that he had that's not even mentioned in the Gemara. That if it has a very wide beak, he says that's already a siman that it's kosher amongst ducks. For ducks, with a wide beak. That's very possible. I mean, Dr. Slipkin also explains why some of the anatomical features indicate whether it's a bird of prey or not. Right? One of the things he mentioned, he says that if it has a peelable gizzard, he says animals that eat a lot of vegetation, that get rocks and stones and things like that, so they need a thicker lining inside their gizzard to protect them from. Whereas if you're eating meat, right, you don't need an inner line. I think if I understood Dr. Slipkin correctly, that's what he's saying. Right. Obviously, the Etzbi Yisera, I'm not sure how the Etzbi Yisera plays in there. He says if one finger, according to the Ram, Etzbi Yisera means that one of the fingers in the middle is longer. Does that maybe that's inhibits them from killing their prey? Perhaps I don't know. I'm just going to leave that. Okay. Another indication of something being kosher, number 8 in the reference sheet, is the Gemara. The Gemara says, "Shachinim atmeim tamei." If the animal lives and hangs out, lives together with non-kosher species, that's an indication that it's non-kosher. Im tahirim tahar. If it lives with kosher birds, it's an indication that it's kosher. So chickens certainly all live together, right? It's all basically the same species, just different breeds. You have dogs, right? You have German Shepherds, Rottweilers, Bulldogs. You have all sorts of different dogs, but it's certainly from a scientific point of view, it's all the same species, and certainly all the chickens can live together, right? So that would be another indication. Although the Nitziv wanted to bring this as a proof that you can assume that the bird is kosher, but the only problem is that he found a ran. Right? The Gemara gives another simon. The Gemara says shtayim lekan v'shtayim lekan tamei. If you have a bird that, let's say, puts 2 toes, this is number 34 in the reference sheet, the ran chud daf chafez daf erif. He says if the bird puts 2 fingers to one side, let's say if it's standing on a rope, so if it puts 2 fingers to one side, 2 fingers to the other side, right, that's an indication that it's not kosher. Shalosh lekan, if it puts 3 fingers on one side of the rope and 1 finger on the other side of the rope, then it's tahar. So the Ran claims that the simon only works one way. What the Gemara means to say is as follows: that if it's 2 and 2, it's for sure tamei. Right? If it's 3 and 1, it might be tar, it might be not tar. That's the way the Ran wants to understand it. So the Nitziv, and this is the Maram Sheikh, number 36, also wanted to make this claim that when the Gemara says shachin and matamim tamei, it meant to say that if it lives amongst non-kosher birds, it's for sure not kosher. If it lives amongst kosher birds, then it might be kosher, it might not be kosher, which to me is very perplexing. Why the Gemara would give us something so misleading? So the Gemara stated if it lives with tamei,
that's definitive.
Yeah, it sounds definitive. It's
not as definitive.
Exactly. He's saying if it lives with a tahar, if it hangs around kosher, it's kosher. If it hangs around non-kosher, it's not kosher. And the Ran says no. It only works one way, which really means to say the Gemara expressed itself in a way that could mislead us to assume that a non-kosher bird is kosher. Okay, so I'm not sure why he did that. But they did find an interesting proof that if you look at the Rambam 35 in the reference sheet, the Rambam says, Kol ha-shoichin im if you have a bird that lives amongst non-kosher, right, the nidmalam, and he looks like them, harei tamei, then it's tamei. So the Rambam only gave half the rule. Right? Why did the Rambam give us the second half of the coin? He gave us only one side of the coin. The Rambam says that if he lives with Tmeim, then it's
tamei. He also added the piece, the nidmalam. The
nidmalam, exactly. It's an addition to the Rambam. So they said clearly the Rambam only gave us half the statement because the Rambam held that when the Gemara says that if it lives amongst pure, it means that it's pure. It means to say it could be pure. Okay? But in any case, it would be a nice proof. I would love to just take the Gemara Pashtus and use that as a proof. But I don't think we need that proof because since the chickens, I think what we said previously, that the fact that the chickens are interbreeding with each other spontaneously, if they could procreate from each other, that's already a more compelling proof. We don't even need that. Okay? If you're interested, you can look at 40, the Shalom Eshev. He has an angry polemic, number 40 in the reference sheet. This was the Machlokas between the Shalom Eshev and the Shlomo Kluger when they brought a new species of chicken into Galicia. He has a whole long polemic how he says politics are getting involved in halacha. I just thought that was interesting. Some people might find it very interesting. If you want, you can just take the second last paragraph to get a snippet and you can read the rest at home. Woe is to us because of those that breach the parameters of halacha. It says everybody rips apart the Torah, right? Everybody takes their own position. Everybody fortifies a halachic position that's influenced by politics, and he gets really angry. He says if you look at the halacha objectively, he says there would be no reason whatsoever to forbid a new species of chicken. Okay? I think it's pretty convincing that if Rav Shlomo Kluger and the Shalom Eshev lived in 2017, I can't say for sure, because you never know, it's likely that they would be fighting over the same thing, because it was very similar, the machlokes they had in Galicia is very similar to the machlokes that came out in 2017. But I always found it very perplexing that Rav Moshe Sternbach, who's the head of the Kashrus of the Eirach HaRedis, says this chicken is oif tamei.
He had to stop it dead in its tracks.
He had to stop it in his tracks.
I had to stop it. I think or else, no, I'm serious.
No, because it was threatening the entire kashrus infrastructure.
So they had to stop it dead in its tracks before they got.
He did.
Yeah, I know.
If Rav Moshe Sternbach says it's an oif tamei, nobody wants to eat it.
So the only problem is that nobody ever tasted that stupid chicken.
It looks like a chicken. It quacks like a chicken.
It tastes like a tire.
It tastes like a tire.
It's terrible. I'm serious.
The broccoli chicken is
It
there.
tastes like a tire, and they didn't realize that. And there are few people that actually taste this. You can't eat this thing.
It's not even edible.
No, it's inedible. It's impossible.
Yeah, so it would have never taken off anyways. Okay? Now, this is just the last section of the Shiur, and then next Shiur we'll be meeting after Sukkot, so I'm going to start a new topic. This is because there's so many similarities, right? I wanted to talk about eating the grasshoppers. I remember that some people were aghast because they said, Herschel Schachter is eating grasshoppers. How could a Herschel Schachter eat grasshoppers? Don't you need a Masara for grasshoppers? So this addresses that question that people raised against Rav Stern.
One thing they didn't mention is that they fry the grasshoppers in the pot that his wife cooks turkey in.
Okay. Is that your addition, that they fried them? Okay. I think what Harry's talking about is that you mentioned that he'll eat, or Herschel Schachter will, even though he doesn't eat turkey, but he'll eat from a pot in which turkey was cooked, even if it's a ben yom on the sugi. And his wife and kids eat it. So you're saying that they fried the grasshoppers in the pot. I think that, okay. Fair enough. So anyways.
Well, so he, in addition, which I learned in the Shiur with him for a number of years. So we used to have to see him. So he allowed the turkey to be served at the same time.
He himself doesn't eat it.
That's
correct. Right. So Nissim Karelitz, towards the end of his life, stopped eating chicken. He was worried about certain that it was liable to become a treifa because of the way they fed the chickens. And if you recall, there was another chicken controversy, which was actually also quite passionate. That's nothing to do with our topic, is that the way the Eirach Haredis was injecting the chickens. They injected chickens with antibiotics. So normally they inject it in the breast of the chicken, and then the Eirach Haredis started with Samad Hagidim. Samad Hagidim is where there's a lot of sinews that cross around the leg. So they were doing the injection there, because they worried that if they injected in the breast, that they could might puncture the lungs or the heart. They said it's better to do the Tzad Nagidim. And then there was a big uproar. A Bransdorf or a Marsh says you're making the chickens all treif, and it made another. And this Rabbi Shlomo was on the other side. He said it's fine, our chickens are kosher, and the Bransdorf says your chickens are not kosher. And then people stopped eating the Eirach Haredis chickens.
Right, but nobody ever blows the lungs on a chicken.
No, that's what they're saying. It's much better to get it at the breast because you have to be a real doofus. The breast, everyone knows the chicken breast looks. It's big, it's fleshy. There's no way to puncture. But you put the Tzavos Hagidim, you hit the wrong. All right, that's another completely nothing to do with our topic. So now, with regards to eating grasshoppers, so again, the Mishnah Chulin Daf Tes, number 41 on the reference sheet, also gives us anatomical features to identify a kosher grasshopper. Kosher shel arba reglaim, it has 4 feet. Arba knafayim, 4 wings. Katzotayim are those long antenna. Well, not really antennas. I think you see at the back. I'm sorry, I don't know the scientific term for it, but it's basically it looks like 2 legs that look like 2 big V's. They go above the back. Okay. For kanafa of chayf and asrubai, the rings cover most of the body of the grasshopper. Rav Yossi Omer Shmo Chagav. Rav Yossi says, in addition to all of these anatomical features, it needs to be called a chagav. Now, obviously, right, that's where the problem lies. It has to be called a chagav. The question is, do we rule like Rav Yossi or not? So if you look at the Gemara, if you want to see a bit more details about these anatomical features, you can look at number 42 in the reference sheet. But anyways, these simonim, these telltale features of the grasshoppers is a halacha psuk in Shulchan Aruch, number 43 on the reference sheet, siman pehei, siman chagavim, dalad reglayim, dalad profayim, knachal chayf nesruvay, erich gufay, v'rev hekefay, which means that we're machmer, that when it says that the wings cover most of the body, that it should cover most of the length and also most of the circumference. Right? Those 2 little legs that help the grasshopper or the locust launch. Okay? Now, if you look at the Rif doesn't quote Rav Yossi at all. Rav Yossi says that in addition to these anatomical features, it needs to be called a chagav. The Rif doesn't quote it. So the Ran already comments that it's clear that according to the Rif, we don't rule like Rav Yossi. It doesn't need to be called a chagav, which means according to the Rif, we have almost a carte blanche to eat any grasshopper that has all the anatomical features that are identified in the Mishnah, because it doesn't need to be called. If it needed to be called a chagav, you would need a masara that is called a chagav. Exactly. That's according to the Rif. So according to the Rif, we would not have restrictions to eat grasshoppers as long as we can see that it has these anatomical features. Okay, number 47, but the truth is, it's not so simple, because in Taman they were eating a certain grasshopper, that didn't really have the legs rise above the body. The legs were kind of, those launchers in the back were kind of level with the rest of the body. So the Maritzchias already has a whole discussion on there. Some places said that the Taimanim are not allowed to be eating this chagav, and then a whole discussion. I didn't look very much into this discussion. I do know,
So I'm wondering if there's no issue, not Marisai, I'm not find the right term.
Yeah.
If people that aren't that strict on halacha, and they see a rabbi eating
a chagav.
Now, they say, and it could get down, to third or fourth hand, saying that Herschel Schachter ate a bug.
Very good.
Ate a grasshopper, but they didn't know that this specific, so it could be Machshir,
the
people
Rabbi
who say that this guy did this, and then
so let me just...
There are cases, I'm trying to remember the cases in which you say, your machmir shema, people will... Yeah,
the Gemara in Eruvin. So let me repeat your comment. Yoni was saying that if Rosh Hashanah is eating a grasshopper, that might lead the Hamoinam, it might lead the masses to start eating grasshoppers without appreciating that some grasshoppers are kosher and some grasshoppers are not kosher. So maybe this would lead... They meet other bugs. So the truth is, we do find examples like that in Gemara Eruvin in two places, Daf Dalet or Daf Vav. I remember where Rav says that in a place of Amei Aretz, Dardisha, he wouldn't let them do certain things that were really mutter because it might become a slippery slope. It might lead them to do other things. Or, for example, we saw that there's certain things, we already mentioned this when we talked about the head of Shiur, about there are certain things that a Tzurva Rabbanan shouldn't do, right? Because it will lead others to stray. So it's an interesting point. Some people did make that claim, so we'll hang on to that claim that there's a reason not to eat grasshoppers because it might lead others to eat even non-kosher species of grasshoppers. It doesn't taste good.
If it was any good, they'd be stamping over grasshoppers.
Very good.
A tiny stamp for each.
That's right. However, the Rambam, the Rosh, already rules that it needs to have this last siman that it's called the Chagav, because he learned that Rav Yossi was not disagreeing with the Tanna Kama. Rav Yossi was simply adding to the Tanna Kama. Beis Yosef and Siman Behei, the Beis Yosef already quotes the Rajba, right? That rules also like the Rosh and the Ran, that Rav Yossi, the Faresh Divrei Tanna Kama also. Can you see in 48 that according to the Beis Yosef, they don't rule like the Rif. They rule like the Rajba, the Ran, that it also needs to be called a chagav. And that's the ruling of the Tur, and that's the ruling of the Shulchan Aruch, number 50 in your reference sheet. So that's why for grasshoppers you need a mesaret, so that to know that it's called chagav. Now, we already quoted the Gemara in Chulin, number 51, the reference sheet Gemara in Chulin. Where do you get the mesaret from? Not from a Torah teacher. You get the Masara from a hunter. So it's the same thing. The Shulchan Aruch says that the Masara, with regards to Chagav, if it's called a Chagav or not, is not something that you go to the Beis Medrash to ask. Right? You go to the experts in wildlife, the wildlife experts, and they'll tell you what's called a Chagav. Okay?
At the very end, it says it should be a Rav who is a hunter.
No, Rav means Rav also means a teacher. It means a tzayad, professor, exactly. A Rav can also be called a professor. Okay? That's what the Rambam rules number 53 in the reference. Just as the Gemara said, that an expert can tell you that this is a bird that belongs to a kosher species, he can also tell you that this is called a chagav. Okay? Now, number 57, this is a very important point that the Beis Yosef touches upon. What happens if you have one Jewish community that has a Masora? Can another Jewish community eat a certain species based on the Masora of the other Kehillah? Now, Pipashas, why not? If I could believe a hunter, right? Why can't I believe another Kehillah? In as much as I believe a hunter that this is a kosher species of bird, or I believe a hunter that this is called a Chagav, why should one community not be allowed to eat from another?
Rabbi Yossi Aglili in chicken.
Rabbi Yossi Aglili, that was a psak. He had a different opinion about eating chicken with milk together.
No, could another community...
No, because that was machlokas. Yeah, No, because that was a machloket, essential machloket in Psak, is how to understand the halacha. Here it's not a question of how to understand the halacha. Here it's just a reality, it's a metzius. Is it called chagav or is it not called chagav? There's no there's no inherent or essential disagreement in the halacha. It just means, can we rely on another community?
Yosef, regarding oath was not a...
No, that was a halachic disagreement how to expound the Torah. So number 57 in the reference sheet, if you look at the bold section, what does the Rosh say? The Rosh says, why not? Let one community rely on another community. Okay, it's completely reasonable. Okay? Now, the Beis Yosef pointed out,
The Masorah is that it's a chagav.
That it's called chagav.
Chagav, or that they've just been eating the same thing for dozens of years.
The Masorah means that this community has been eating it for many, many years, presumably because they know that this is called chagav. Because they know it's called chagav.
No, I understand that.
No, you either need a Masorah that is called chagav, a hunter, a wildlife expert needs to tell you it's called chagav, or if this community is eating it for so many generations, clearly it's a chagav, exactly. Now, 59 in the reference sheet, there's also a Rashba. Look at number 59 in the reference sheet. If you just look at the bold section there. He says, maybe the communities that are not eating grasshoppers, this might suggest what you talked about, Yoni, maybe they have a minhag not to eat a grasshopper, which means to say they're not refraining from eating the grasshopper because they lack knowledge. Maybe they have a minhag not to eat it. Okay? Why would they do that? Yoni, that's your point. Look at number 59 in the reference sheet, the last line of the Rashba. It could be that they're refraining from eating a certain bird because it's similar in its appearance to non-kosher birds. So they're refraining from eating a bird they know is kosher because it might lead people to eat a non-kosher bird.
Regarding one community to another. There's a story of a Meshulach who went to Morocco.
Yeah.
And Meshulach from Yerushalayim. Or somebody came from Yerushalayim and saw the Moroccans that on the 8th day of Pesach, they went out to the fields with sandwiches, sandwiches, and made out in the fields sandwiches on the 8th day. And he's Dazan, and he asked him, where did it come from? He says, because tradition is that many years ago, Meshulach came from Yerushalayim. Yeah. And on the 8th day,
he was in the field, very nice.
And people saw it, and they thought it was a great...
Let me repeat what Yoni said to our viewers on Zoom. Yoni is basically saying there was a community, they were going out of the city to eat chametz on the 8th day. Why? Because they saw Meshulach from Eretz Yisrael go chutz l'tchum to eat his chametz. So they started to do the same thing.
It must be a very important...
Right. So let me just... You must know what he's doing. So I'll just finish up. I'll take another 3 minutes. Sorry about going a little overtime. I just don't want to drag on. I'll finish in 3 minutes. So basically, the Beis Yosef understood that there's a machlokas between the Rosh and the Rashba. According to the Rosh, one community can rely on another community. According to the Rashba, you can't. Comes along the Achronim, the Yam Shloim of the Maharshal, number 61 in the reference sheet, number 62 in the reference sheet, number 63 the Shach, and they all say, Ma pitom, there's no machloket. The Rosh was saying that one community can rely on another community, which is a no-brainer, because if you can rely on the hunter, why should one community not rely on the other community? Well, the Rashba meant something else. If they are refraining from eating the chicken, right, not because of lack of knowledge, but because they say that it looks the same, it's similar in appearance, so as a safeguard, right, they decided to accept it upon themselves not to eat it. So that's a chumrah for the community, exactly. So the Rashba agrees that if you have a community that never took on a chumrah not to eat a chicken, a specific chicken, so then they could rely on the Masorah of the other community. In fact, the Rosh himself says the same concept. The Rosh number 64 says the same thing that the Rashba himself said. He says that if you have a community that refrains from eating birds as a minhag, then they shouldn't eat it. So obviously there's no machlokas between the Rosh and the Rashba. So what's the most important thing? Can we rely on the Taimanim Masorah to eat grasshoppers? So it depends why the Ashkenazim were not eating grasshoppers. Were they eating it just because they didn't know what a chagav is? In that case, we would be allowed to rely on the Taimanim Masorah. Or did we take it upon ourselves not to eat grasshoppers because it might lead, as you said, it might lead us to eat non-kosher species of grasshopper. So if you look at number 65 and number 66, the Taz makes it very clear that it's the former. The Taz seems to say that we don't eat it because we are not baki b'shmei seyan, which sounds...
What the Messiah is, since we ourselves cannot verify it, we're not allowed.
Right, so the question is how to... It all boils down to how you understand this Taz.
Right.
Did the Taz mean to say that we didn't eat grasshoppers in Ashkenazi communities because we didn't know what a chagab is? It means it's lack of knowledge, but if we got the knowledge from the Taiman, we would eat it. Right? Or is it something that's chumrah that the Ashkenazi communities took upon themselves? There's a famous Ramban in it's quoted by the Rivash.
Based on the Prima Goda here, it's the option should no hagen shalolech shum.
The Prima Goda sounds like with shum chagab. The language is a little bit ambiguous, but that's really what it boils down to. So Hershel Schachter fully understands that the reason why the Ashkenazi communities were not eating chagavim was not because we took it upon ourselves as a chumrah not to eat it, but just we lacked the knowledge. He said he sat with Rav Machbod, who was a Taimi expert in kashrus, and he taught them. He said that we have a Messiah that this is called a chagah. I mean, in Reish Yudalid, in Yerodea, in Hilchos Nedarim, Pesach quotes the Rivash, the quotes the Ramban. This is that a chayrim, the koach of a chayrim, that a community takes on a chumrah, it passes on from generation to generation. That's what Rabbi B'chanan said. Why we don't eat kidneys? Because the kidneys. It's the famous the concept of the famous. So next week, I'm open to take any suggestions for topics. Not next week, after